Ag of August Fáilte. Hi, hello. It's me, Jon O'Sullivan from the Irish Pagan School, and we're coming back to you with another topic, and it's another brief discussion about, my knowledge and my understanding and my experience with a particular Irish deity. And this time we're looking at Lugh. This is a complex one for me, so I will do my best to kind of cover some of the academia, but then some of my own personal perspectives as well, which is kind of part of the methodology that we do with our teaching here at the Irish Pagan School. We are Irish pagans, the teachers that we have, and we kind of focus on talking about the academia, talking about the lore that we have available, the folklore and the history that we have available, as well as the understanding of the cultural influences of, paganism and spirituality and Irish heritage and Irish culture way back when. But then we acknowledge that it's a living spiritual practice. It's like Irish people ask us all the time, is like, well, why is Irish paganism different to other forms of paganism? Is it not just neo-paganism? Is it not just reconstructionism? It's different because it is a living tradition. It's a living, ongoing spiritual path and spiritual practice. And so that's kind of what we do here at the Irish Pagan School. We kind of share with people our understanding of the lore, the history, the academia, but then we kind of take that step across, and we're always very clear about it. We say, listen, we're moving into what we call UPG, or unique personal gnosis territory, where it's that experiential side of spirituality, that experiential side of paganism. And my relationship with the Dagda, for example, I can talk about him from the lore, I can talk about him from the history, and from all of the records that we have in all of these 11th century texts, written down by the monks, like the Book of Fermoy, the Book of Kells, the Yellow Book of Lecan, etc. But then there's also my relationship with this deity in my ongoing spiritual practice, as I leave offerings on the altar, as I kind of explore my understanding of masculinity with him. But as I've said before, I could talk about the Dags for hours. I actually do, but that's a big core element to our teaching in the schools. So it's that kind of, we want to cover the academia, we want to cover, like, the lore, the resources, the good resources, because there's a lot of bad resources out there. But then we also want to kind of talk about the experiential, the real lived experience of being an Irish pagan working with these gods. So back on track, back on point, we're looking at Lugh today. And it was something that people asked for in the comments. I mentioned all of these other various deities, and I'll be honest, my relationship with Lugh is rather complex. Lugh is one of the very interesting characters in the lore in the Irish mythology, and it's because he falls into this position as a quintessential kind of core figure of destiny. He forms like the central kind of character in the run up to what the story is known as the Cath Maig Tuatha, which is the Battle of Moytura. And it's the second Battle of Moytura, where we run into this conflict between the Tuatha Dé Danann living in Ireland and an invasion from a Fomorian war host, brought about by the bad rule of Brest, their king. I can cover the rave scale of the pre-stories to that. But when we're talking about Lugh, him more than anything else, more than almost any of the other deities, seems to be split. The understanding of him tends to be split. Now, not saying he's a separate deity, he's the same core aspect of Lugh, but him, more than any of the other gods, is shown in different versions of the lore, and they're called recensions. And so you have one copy of the Cath Maig Tuatha, and written in one of the books, would relate a tale in a certain way, but then we have other versions of the story written in these other manuscripts which tells it a different way. And because he is such a core central character to the Cath Maig Tuatha, the Battle of Moytura, he ends up being treated very differently in these different recensions. In one version of it, he comes in, he kind of is, well, okay, in both versions of it, he is the grandson of Balor, who is this war chief or king amongst the Fomorians. And there was a prophecy which said that Balor would be killed by his grandchild. So, as you kind of do, being a fool, he tries to deny destiny, deny prophecy, and he locks his daughter up in a tower, where this is where we then find Cincha in the other version, either through magical means, well, most commonly through magical means, either through involvement with other deities, be Manannán Mac Lir or and Gwivnu, or in the other versions, it's members of the She or the other crowd, the denizens of the other world. They spirit Cian in, and he has this relationship which then leads to the children being born. And there's triplets. So this Etna gives birth to these 3 children. Balor finds out about it and he casts the children into the sea. 2 of them don't survive, but Lugh does. And in one version of it, he's rescued by Manannán Mac Lir, who is his foster father in that story. In the other, he's actually washed up and saved by Gwivnu, who becomes his foster father. And so we have this kind of split narrative as we follow Lugh. And in one version, he is linked more so with the other world. He becomes a lord amongst the other world with his own riders of the She. And when the Fomorian warhost is coming to invade, Nuada is king in Tara at this point, and Lugh turns up with his riders of the She to offer aid. In the other version of the story, we have Lugh kind of being brought and given in fosterage to Tailtiu. And this one, if we're going to talk about personal opinion here, this one is the one that I actually resonate with most, because the month of August is Lunasa in Ireland, and Lunasa is actually a festival held around harvest time, but it's not to honor the god Lugh. It was actually created by Lugh to honor his foster mammy, Tailtiu. And so Tailtiu is this very informed character in the growth of Lugh as an individual, but doesn't get a lot of love in some of the lore unless you kind of follow this one particular tale. There's a town in Ireland called Telltown, and it's actually Tailtiu's town. And she is actually a Firbolg. So if you know anything about the pre-stories, the older stories, there was a first battle in Moytura, and then there's a second. The second is with the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Fomorians. The first is with the Tuatha Dé Danann and the Firbolg. And so Tailtiu being a Firbolg princess, a Firbolg kind of noble, still living and having rank and having position in Ireland after the first battle of Moytura, really shows that it wasn't a conflict of annihilation. It wasn't a conflict of, eradication or anything like that. It was actually just a conflict of supremacy and sovereignty. And so the Tuatha Dé Danann fought the Firbolg at the end of the battle, led by Nuada. Nuada became king, and well, actually, Nuada was horribly wounded. More stories on Nuada. If you're interested in, I will do a video about Nuada. But he was no longer fit to be king. Then we had Brest become king. But at that particular point, the Firbolg were not eradicated. They were given Connacht. They were given the west of Ireland. And for someone like Tailtiu to still be recognized for their status, recognized for her position, and entrusted with a Tuatha Dé Danann, well, a half Tuatha Dé Danann, half Fomorian, like a child of mixed lineage, in fosterage to be raised, shows that there is that respect of like cultural blending. And we know this even from more modern history, that whenever people have come into Ireland, there always seems to be there's something about Ireland that helps people blend and kind of mesh and share and grow together in culture. As we know from the later kind of Saxon and Normans invasions, the Normans kind of adopted so much of Irish culture, so much of Irish fashion, that they were referred to as more Irish than the Irish themselves in some ways. But it was the fact that our culture and our fashion was so attractive, and our kind of art and our expression and our music. Another talk on that another time. We're talking about Lugh. So we have Lugh raised by Tailtiu, and Tailtiu kind of obviously raises Lugh very well, because the next time we find Lugh in the narrative is when Nuada has been restored. He's king in Ireland again. Bress has gone to try and rally the Fomorian warhost to invade and take Ireland by force, because he couldn't keep Ireland by right rule or just rule. More on Nuada and Brest some other time, I'm sure. But Lugh then arrives into Tara, and we have this amazing kind of experience. And if anyone's been to a nightclub and walked up to a nightclub and been told, sorry, mate, not today, that's almost the energy that we get with Lugh arriving to Tara. He's not kind of just, oh my God, it's Lugh, great, come on in. He's challenged at the doorstep by the guards, Gamal and Camal. And it was said that no one could enter the court of the king except by declaring what skills they had upon them. And this was a way to kind of not just show off, it was to show what you're bringing to the table, what you're bringing to the tour, what you're bringing to the tribe of value and of use. And so, props to Talchu. She must have raised Lugh very well, because he lists off a whole ream of skills and abilities. He's a brazier, which is a cooker. He's a wright, which is a woodworker. He's a leech, which is a surgeon, and like not just a medic, not just a herbologist. It's also a surgeon. He's a leech, and so he goes through all of these different skills. He's a warrior. He's a poet. Like he's a harper. But every time he mentions some skill, he's told, sorry, mate, not today. We don't need you. Sure, we have someone inside. He mentions being a leech. We have Dean Kecht. He's the best in Ireland. He mentions being right. We've got Lugh. He's the best in Ireland. Oh, I'm a Smith. It's like, we don't need you. We got Gwivnu inside. Do you even know who's inside here? And so Lugh is then caught, and he tries to present all of these different skills, all these abilities that he has, and he's told, not today. But then he has an awareness, he has a realization, he takes a moment of introspection. And this is one thing I do like about Lugh, because he is aware of himself. Yes, he's capable of all these kind of things, but given him a moment, he kind of catches to himself, and he's very quick thinking. And so he thinks about it and he goes, do you have anyone inside who can do everything? And that's where Gomal and Comal get stuck, because everyone inside has their areas, has their skills. Oma is inside. He's the champion of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the strongest of them, who's also a scholar and a poet. All of them have their skills and their abilities, but there's not one person who has an ability or a capability with everything. And that's what gets Lugh inside. And so Lugh is then referred to by this word, Ildanach. And what that translates as is many interlinked skills. So he's not just good at lots of different things. He's good at lots of things that weave in together and support each other. And that's kind of why Nuada, when he kind of assesses Lugh, he sees Lugh, he's like, actually, we've got a war coming up and we need to have the right person leading. We need to have the right person in the seat of the king. And so what happens then is that Nuada makes the choice to abdicate in favor of Lugh. And so Lugh goes to the seat of the king, and Nuada kind of swaps out and goes to the seat of the sage. So this is kind of where we see Lugh's, like, he's had this kind of sad, tragic origin. He's then built with all of this ability and skill. He's then put in this position of power and authority, because it's all running along the lines of this prophecy towards a fateful conflict between him and his grandfather Balor. So as much as he's a child of destiny, he's also a child of doom. And it's this duality that is very, very fascinating about Lugh. He's a child of two lineages. He's half Fomorian, half Tuatha Dé Danann. He's coming in all of these skills, but he's kind of prophesized to bring hope and security and safety to the Tuatha Dé Danann, but at the doom of, his grandfather, of his blood lineage. And so there is this dichotomy and duality within Lugh, which is very, very interesting to explore as a character. So we then have to look at the other recension, the other version. Like, once again, we have these two separate narratives, these two separate stories, which show Lugh in two different ways. Now, I am not in any way setting Lugh up as a kind of a Janus character, a Janus deity. Janus is a different deity from a different pantheon, who is a two-faced god who has like two different perspectives on it. Lugh's not that. What we have is two separate stories, but we have a duality existing within Lugh as a character, as a deity. But when we kind of communicate and talk to Lugh, it is from a whole different range of things. And this is one thing that really frustrates me as well, because I've mentioned in other kind of conversations in the previous video about the god of love and why it's Angus MacOg, and why it's not Angus MacIndoch. So that was the previous video on there. But speaking from this kind of Greco-Roman perspective and influence, it was Julius Caesar who kind of coined this pater, sky father, and tried to stick that on Dagda, because he was looking at all of these Celtic religions and saying, well, this looks like this, and sure, like Hermes is the god of medicine, so obviously this other god who's linked with medicine must be a god of medicine as well. And this is where we get that conflict with Lugh, because Lugh is described in a story as being sun-faced, in that he's just such a good-looking guy that, allegorically speaking, the sun shines out of his face. And that's how he's described, that like he's this kind of beautiful countenanced individual, but taken out of perspective, taken out of context in a different way. Suddenly he's Apollo and he's a sun god. Lugh is a sun god because of this one thing. He's not. Just going to say it again for the people in the back. Lugh is not a sun god. Lugh is not connected to a solar deity or a solar form in any way. If you want to look for someone who's connected with the solar god, look to the god who actually declares himself as having authority over the sun and who literally stops the sun in its track so that 9 months passes as a day. You know who I'm talking about. It's the Dagda. But again, he's not just a sun god. He is capable of so much other stuff. And this is where I do get very frustrated. So back on track. Lugh is this amazing kind of character, amazing kind of like capable deity. And he's also this kind of tragic figure as well, because as much as he's destined towards this prophecy and this fulfillment, he's also doomed to be bound to that prophecy and the fulfillment. So when the Battle of Moytura comes, I talked about the arranging of the forces and everything else at a different time, but Lugh slips from his bodyguards and wades into the battlefront. Now, the Tuatha Dé Danann, having fought the first Battle of Moytura and having had Nuada lose his arm there and almost lose the war, were fucking shit scared of losing the second battle by losing their king. And so they were being very cautious of Lugh. But Lugh slips from them. It actually says that he goes around the edge of the battle first and he performs this amazing kind of practical magic called a crane stance. More on that another time, I'm sure, but it's this kind of position and pose where he's able to look upon the battle and kind of change the influences of it through his abilities. But then he wades right the way in because he knows he has to face this conflict. He has to face his grandfather. And if there was never a more Star Wars-esque kind of trope, we all look at Star Wars and Luke and Anakin or Darth Vader, this kind of like, I'm your father, all of this stuff comes from older legends, comes from older stories. And you could look at Lugh kind of going into the battle knowing he has to face his patriological line, his grandfather in Balor. And they do come face to face and they do have the conflict, and it does lead to Balor dying. So destiny is fulfilled in this, and then Lugh kind of rules in Ireland for another 40 years. Where I kind of have the other version, the other story of Lugh, gives a different insight into his character, because it succeeds with the Battle of Moytura, but then it does branch slightly again, because we then have the Children of Turin. So this is a different narrative, a different story, and the Children of Turin, the three sons of Turin, kill Cinnte, which is Lugh's dad, because they were at war. They were like rival tribes. But Lugh, instead of kind of claiming a blood kind of price in line with the law, which he's entitled to, the law like for his father, he kind of sets the playing field up differently. And he's like, okay, well, what I need from you in order to kind of play balance is not just a blood price. I need you to do a couple of jobs for me, just a couple of small tasks for me. And it's almost like the 12 labors of Hercules or Heracles, in that Lugh sets the three children of Turin up to face these impossible, horrific tasks, which is invariably designed to lead to their death. He asks them to go retrieve various magical items for him. Oh yeah, I just need you to nip over here and get this thing for me. But of course, they then have to overcome vast monsters. They have to travel. They have to, it's a whole saga, the Children of Turin. But instead of kind of dealing with it up front, he deals with it in this manipulative way of trying to get them all killed in some other form. Like the last thing that he asked them for is 3 shouts from a hill. It's like, yeah, just go up that hill and shout for me 3 times, but he doesn't tell them that this particular hill is bound by an oath of silence, which is protected by a whole band of expert warriors to ensure that no one makes any noise on that hill. So the 3 brothers have to battle their way up the hill, shout 3 times and break like the oath of silence on this hill in order to try and get them all killed. And so it's a different aspect of Lugh. When we look at a different story of Lugh, when later on, Lugh has multiple wives, one of which was Naas. Naas was Naas's name is actually still on a town in Kildare. in Ireland right now. And Naas or Nos kind of had a tryst with Kermit, one of the Dagda's sons, which then Lugh doesn't deal with it in any other way apart from killing Kermit. And that does lead the Dagda to go and find the power of life or death to take up the club and bring his child back to life. But it is this kind of another aspect of Lugh. So he's not, it's not just this epitome of warrior, epitome of skill or wise character. He's also very temperamental. He's also very emotional in many of the different aspects of the stories, but he doesn't deal with things very directly. He also deals with things rather obliquely or manipulatively. Now, it might be just an indication of his mind, his mindset, the fact that he has all of these variety of skills, all of these different ways of thinking about things. Because if you're going to approach a particular labor, a particular task, someone approaching it from a blacksmith's point of view is going to have a different perspective as someone approaching it from a woodworker's point of view. You know, there's still crafts, there's still skills, there's still creation, but there's still a different way of thinking about it. And so I have my own conflicted relationship with Lugh personally. He is capable of so many different things, and I honor that and I respect that. But where I am growing in my personal life, as I've talked about in other stories, and the idea of male aggression, anger, violence, violent outbursts and dominations, like it's not something I personally connect with from my own health, my own kind of spiritual path as I'm growing at the moment. So I can respect Lugh for where he is. I can honor Lugh for where he is, but he's not someone I have a lot of talk with. And in fact, cards on the table, I feel a little bit grumbly about it at times because, you know, the Dagda is literally called the good god because he's good at everything. In other versions of the stories, he's actually referred to as the Saville Ildanach, which is the same kind of wording, this many interlinked skills as the word Ildanach, but Dagda is also applied to that kind of mastery of all of these different kind of abilities and skills. And so in my past, someone has asked me about that. A Lugh kind of worshipper and Lugh follower has asked me about the difference between Ildanach and Saville Ildanach. I gave a kind of snarky kind of response because of my own kind of stuff dealing with Lugh. And so apologies to that person if they ever do see this. And they came on a tour guide with me to the Hill of Tara, and I wasn't as respectful as I possibly could have been, because I was still processing my own stuff at that time. But it's important to acknowledge the mistakes as we make them, and it's important to kind of grow from them as best we can. Lugh is a great deity. He really, really is. He is, if you are in any way a crafts person of any type, Lugh is someone you can work with. If you're in any way someone who deals or is kind of conflicted with being able to focus on projects and kind of like, you know, completions of works, Lugh is a great person to talk to for that. If you're feeling burdened by your own abilities and your own skills, you know, if you're not feeling comfortable with the fact that you have these abilities and skills, self-esteem issues, Lugh is a good person to talk to as well, because he will understand and can understand from multiple different perspectives the growth of an objective or the purpose and the completion of a thing. So I do have time of day for Lugh. I don't kind of have animosity towards Lugh. I just have a bit of a personal discomfort with the emotional sides of dealing with Lugh. But that is, again, where I've stepped across into some of my own stuff. You can see probably where I talked about the lore and the information up front, and then I moved into talking about my own personal stuff, and I used the I language and my stuff, my words. So there's one other thing I want to talk about with Lugh, and this is something that always needs addressing and needs to be something that people are very aware of. There is a very unhealthy, very toxic, and very, to be frankly honest, racist view of Lugh. In that, because of this Apollo merging sun deity, there's this belief that Lugh is this blonde-haired, blue-eyed, white-skinned, fair-haired, like god of everything, who is just brilliant at all the rest of it. And that's then held up as this trope of this almost Aryan-esque ideal and deity. That is bullshit. It is fucking wrong. Lugh is a mixed race child. Lugh is a child of two different, again, maybe mixed race might be too far. He's a child of two different tribes, two different cultures. He's half Fomorian, half Tuatha Dé Danann, you know? he is a mix of two different cultures, two different blends of people, yet he is accepted and like he is grown by with the knowledge and the wisdom of both. If you think about it, like he has three different cultural influences in his upbringing. You know, his mother's cultural influence, his father's cultural influence, and then Tailtean's cultural influence as a Firbolg, all of which then blends into Lugh to then lead him to grow into this beautiful, multifaceted, multi-talented deity. So that when it comes to the time of challenge, when it comes to the time of fulfilling a prophecy and going against some of the hardest things to go against, which is family, Lugh is capable of that. Lugh is up for the task, and Lugh is able to do whatever he needs to do from any different aspect to ensure that the right thing happens, which is the security of his people, the growth of his people in their own country. But it's important to acknowledge the fact that he does come from a multi-different faceted. He's a blend of beautiful blend of expression as a deity. And in fact, from my own personal exploration of the lore, Bress, the king in Ireland who took over after the first Battle of Moytura, is also half Tuatha Dé Danann, half Firbolg. Oh, sorry, half Fomorian. And so from a narrative point of view, you have, you know, Bress who's put in position. His mother was Tuatha Dé Danann, his father was Fomorian, and he doesn't do it the right way. He rules poorly. You know, he doesn't kind of treat the Tuatha Dé Danann with as much respect. If anything, he actually leans too far into his lineage as a Fomorian, and that injustice, that imbalance leads to him not ruling rightly, and then the rebellion really, which leads to the second Battle of Moytura. And much like any really great narrative or any really great story, you have this one character of mixed lineage who makes the mistakes and causes the problem. But then you have another character of similar mixed lineage who comes in to resolve the problem. So Lugh is almost like this balm or this balance restoring, you know, and again, if you know your Star Wars lore, the chosen one to come in and to restore balance to the narrative, the force, the culture and the people. So that's some of my thoughts on Lugh. As ever, I do kind of just go deep into my thoughts about it. I do read all of the lores. I absolutely love the Irish mythology, the Irish kind of cultural heritage, and all of these stories that inform my kind of living spirituality, as I mentioned. If you have heard something you liked, throw me a comment down below. I'd love to hear it. If you have any questions that you think I might be able to kind of give you a perspective on, throw it in the comments as well. I'd love to hear from you. And if you would like to keep up with these videos whenever they come out, do hit the subscribe button, do hit the bell for notifications. It's the only way you're going to know if your question gets answered, or if you get to see my face on any particular day as we kind of grow and change and explore our spirituality together. So from myself here, Jon O'Sullivan at the Irish Pagan School, Guru of Mahagas, thank you very, very much. And until the next time, look after yourself. Slán. Bye.